How does your school support transitions for new students? Do your students lead the way as ambassadors welcoming and supporting new students? And wouldn't it be helpful to have a guidebook to help with this process? Welcome back to our returning listeners and a warm welcome to those joining us for the first time. This is the Educators Going Global podcast. I'm David, and alongside my co-host Audrey, we bring you insights from nearly 50 years of combined experience teaching overseas, sharing the latest in international education to help you stay informed and inspired. In this show, we delve into very practical support strategies, specifically unpacking the SPAN Student Ambassador Program Guide to help our listeners learn more about how you can support transitions in your schools. Now get ready to once again feel the energy and benefit from the expertise that Lina Palmgarten and Amy Shufflin bring to the topic of supporting transitions in our international school communities.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Educators Going Global. We're so excited to have Lina and Amy back with us. We just had so much to talk about the last time that we decided to make it into two shows, and thankfully the ladies were willing to do that for us. So welcome back, Amy and Lina. And let's just start by asking, where in the world are you? So Amy, where are you?
I am in Chicago in the United States.
Okay. And Lina?
I am in Vienna, Austria.
Cool. Thank you again for being with us. And we start with a going global story. Have you got one for us, Lina?
Yes, I do. Okay. I'm going to share one that's quite relevant to the stories we've been telling here about transitions. So a little bit of background about me. I'm a third culture kid, and I have an Austrian passport. But until the age of 12, I had only lived outside of Austria. I was born in Kenya, I lived in Canada, and then we lived in Côte d'Ivoire, which is West Africa, Ivory Coast in English. And so until that age, we'd always gone back to Austria for vacation times, but we had never lived there. So at the age of 12, my age of 12, we then moved back home to Austria. And it was the first time for me to live in Austria. And it was also, I'm going to say, without a doubt, the worst transition, the hardest transition I've ever had my whole life. I was there between the ages of 12 to 16, extremely difficult. I had no self-esteem whatsoever. I had to give a presentation to my class about what it was like living in Africa. You're not seeing the little quotes that I'm showing about how I didn't walk to school with an elephant, like those kinds of things. And this was, in the 90s. So very different when you now have the internet versus back then. And so I really, really struggled living in Austria. And I'm going to have to say it as it is. I hated it. I hated Austria. And when I was 16, we left back overseas, back to an international schools. The other thing I have to say is I was put into a public school in Austria, which was a double transition, not only a transition to the country and the continent, but also school system transition. And that, I think, is huge and very hard. The public school system in Austria, I was the only kid that arrived. There was no, this topic we're talking about, arriving and leaving, that's not a thing, or wasn't back then. And then at the age of 25, I had gone through a few different various degrees and decided to come back to Austria for a year and to do a second master's degree. So I was living in Austria again by choice this time, kept myself very busy, but there was this, I was still very young, and I had this, I need to leave Austria. I'm so scared to get stuck here and never leave again. And that's the biggest fear I have, is feeling stuck. And being stuck in Austria was my biggest fear. And so I needed to leave. And I kept moving years and years after that. And it wasn't until I was 43, a few years ago, that I moved back to Austria, choosing a sabbatical, coming back to be with my family. And this is, I think, the part that made a big difference. So not only does my brother have a nephew who's very similar age to my new puppy dog, I then also now responsible for a being, and that changed everything. I love Austria now because now I'm able to experience it through her eyes and nature and living in Vienna and how beautiful it is from her perspective, how green it is, how dog friendly it is. There's dog zones where you can let your dog off the leash, and there's one literally in front of my apartment. Like, so many things that I'm now experiencing that I was so closed off against and not open to when I was younger. And I think it's a nice story in terms of understanding what home means, because I think home is it can be such a charged word, and the meaning around it, when you're going back home, quote unquote, what does that mean? When I'm going back home to a home that I never lived in, at the age of 12, that my parents called home their whole lives. And they weren't third culture kids. They had decided as adults to move abroad. So it was a very different experience. And I felt like sharing that kind of like over time, maturity and different life experiences, different life choices, different life phases, and how that experience of home completely changes.
That's so amazing. And it's all about your lens that you're viewing it with and what a difference that makes. And also what Amy was talking about in the first show, the think destination idea. And, what's really cool about this new place I'm going to, if you're looking at it from that perspective, it can make a difference versus, oh no, I hated it there, I might hate it there again. It can change everything. So I love that story. Thank you for that. Amy, how about you?
So I moved to Venezuela in 2008. My only other international experience was working in a hostel in Amsterdam for like half a year, but with a lot of people from all over the world. That's where I fell in love with all things international. Then I moved back to the United States. I got married very quickly. And then I was like, when are we going to leave this place? So it was 2008. It was not a good year for teachers or anybody in the United States. So it was like, okay, let's go. So within 2 months of being married, we had a job in Venezuela. And 8 months after we got married, we moved to Venezuela. So we'd lived with other people in basements and had no stuff. So worked out great, right? I didn't have to worry about much to move to another country. I knew nothing about where I was going or who I was working with or anything. And I wasn't, I got my master's of education like while I was abroad. Started out, that wasn't my career. I started out as an English language teacher and was given 1st through 12th graders to teach, and I didn't know anything. So I had my first group of English language learners. It was all basically the completely non-English speaking kids. And I had this group of middle school kids. And my husband and I moved to Venezuela. We thought, we'll be there for 2 years. We'll learn all the Spanish and we'll move back to the United States and we'll be ready to teach and speak all the Spanish. It will be really great. I know everyone I'm seeing is laughing because
Yeah.
we all know that it takes a lot longer to learn a language, and fluency is a whole thing. So, yeah. After our first year abroad, we went to an orientation to learn all about, after the first year, finally went to the orientation to learn all about what we were doing. So it was my big aha moment. I learned all about TCKs, third culture kids. And I went back to school and I was like, oh, wow, okay. Nobody was teaching them how to say goodbye well. They didn't know about themselves, nothing. I was like, well, I got to go teach this. Because I wasn't just the English language teacher. I was also like the life skills teacher and the Bible teacher, did all the things. So I started working with the students and I was like, we're going to raft together. We're going to work on things where I want to build relationships. And since I learned how important stability is for third culture kids and the constant question of when are you leaving, that became really important to my husband and I. And we decided that especially in a country that was so unstable, it was really important to us that we be stable. So we pretty quickly decided, okay, we're going to stay to watch these 7th graders that I started with graduate. And I had one student in particular. He, after the 5 years I spent with him, because we ended up staying 10, but after the 5 years I spent with him, he came back to visit his family while I was there. And we went out to coffee and we were talking. And I mean, he was this kid who was like, my little punk rocker. He and I would talk about music all the time. And he was like the anarchist. And anyways, I love this kid. He's now a very big adult, but I still think of him as a kid. But he and I sat down to coffee and I asked him, man, when did you decide that you trusted me? Because I started teaching him when I was in 7th grade. And he said, after I graduated. And I was like, seriously, man. It's like all that time we spent together. Because I mean, we spent so much time with the kids. It was every day. I had lunch with them. We taught class with them. I had them all those years, every single day. So much time with them. And I was like, why? And he's like, man, I just didn't trust anybody. Everybody kept leaving. I didn't know if people were going to accept me for me. Like, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad. Because then he asked me if it was worth it for me. Was it worth it for me? All the things that I lost from not being with my family and to be there with him. And I had told him I wouldn't change a thing. I love those, and I love getting to continue to know them as adults. Like it's such a wonderful, beautiful thing to watch them grow, their stories change, to grow into the people they are, and to get to continue to be like that. To me feels a really like a deep sense of home. I know we talked about home. Like honestly, my children and I, we talk about home as basically anywhere we're staying. My daughter yesterday was like, are we going home? You know what I really miss? I miss home. She's talking about her home in Malaysia. She's like, I miss home. But like she's talking about, but I also want to go home because I'm tired. She just means like where we're staying right now, my sister's house is just the home. But that's, for me, it's a lot of just being with the people that I have spent that time with, my students who, are now all over the world, and the people that I've made home with.
Do you know what strikes me about that story? You spent all this time with these students, years, and you also were very intentional about building the relationship, and still he felt like he didn't fully trust you till after he graduated. Imagine taking that and comparing it to a teacher that just, doesn't take all that time and doesn't spend the time intentionally talking about relationships and building the relationships. That's a huge gap in that potential for trust. Wow, that blows me away. Well, good for you staying for extra time to get to know them and watch them graduate. That's just a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both for sharing such personal stories. And I could say to our listeners, you could stop listening to this episode because you just heard a lot of helpful information, but don't. Lina and Amy have so much to share, so keep listening because we have a guiding question. All right, so our guiding question is the same one we had before, and we didn't quite get to the Student Ambassador Program, but we will in this episode. So here's our guiding question. How can schools build or enhance a Student Ambassador Program rooted in positive transitions care? Let's unpack that with some supporting questions. Lina, we'll start with you, drawing from your work with a team of 10 co-creators and writing this guide to designing a Student Ambassador Program. What was the impetus to writing this guide?
So it's funny because our last episode was all about the intentional transitions care piece and why that matters. And we really went into depth about that. And today, I'm really excited that we're going to dig deep into the Student Ambassador Guide that we created and each of the little details that are so fascinating and fun to do. I decided to take a sabbatical from my last school I was working at. I was a high school counselor and a whole school wellness coordinator. And when I left and arrived in Vienna, Austria, so I was quote unquote returning home, as I was sharing in my first story, I made a list of projects that I wanted to be involved with during my sabbatical that were important to me, but I just had never gotten time to do them whilst working a full-time job with the kind of passion that you want to have. So one of those projects was actually contacting SPAN and looking into doing something with them. And most specifically, I had in mind my last school I was at for 9 years, and we had created a really amazing student ambassador handbook. It was a Google Doc, so it was always up to date and always being kept up to date by the students themselves in their leadership roles. Whenever they created a new project, it was just always constantly growing. So it was never this constant printed done deal thing. It was just this thing that just was amazing how it was growing. And so I contacted SPAN to see if they would be interested in creating something like this together. And I got connected with Amy, And here we are a year later. So, Amy, you get to jump in then. What happened when I contacted SPAN and how it came about?
Yeah, so I serve as the SPAN resource lead. I started with the book study for Doug's book, Safe Passage, also be found on our website. And we were looking for more ways to grow resources for SPAN members to provide for the community. So student ambassador programs often exist at international schools, but it's rare to find a one-size-fits-all for international schools. They're also very different. So this was an opportunity to gather best practices because Lina and I are two of the main people who worked on it, but we were with a team of total 10 people who worked on this guide from many different international schools. So it was an opportunity to gather the best practices from SPAN members to work with Lina to create something that could be accessible to schools, no matter what their current program is, in addressing the transition needs of students. Because we made it so that whether you're starting a program, you've never had one, or whether or not you have one already and you want it to grow, both are there available to you depending on where you're at. So that's kind of how it came about.
So the guide seeks to aid in creating programs that are, quote, rooted in positive transitions care. What exactly is transitions care, and why is it so key to the success of a given program? Amy.
So the last time we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how in international schools, that whole middle section of psychological needs of belonging, self-esteem, those things are kind of often missing for international students. They're also missing for their parents and for the staff. So positive transitions care is really about recognizing, acknowledging those needs exist and intentionally supporting them through systems that involve many different contributors in a school, whether it starts with the admissions, the school counselor, the classroom teacher, educating the whole community, and that everybody has a role in helping the community be a place that everyone can attach to. Because really it's the core is about attachment. When we move from place to place and in relationships, we're always looking for someone to attach to. We want community. And international people don't need this any less. They need it just as much, if not more, as they're going from community to community. Not every school is a place to attach to. If you get there and there's nothing to attach to, like there's no real community, or they don't really want you.
Ouch.
Or there's nothing to leave in attachment. Like nobody's recognizing you're leaving. So when you recognize that a school can be a place of attachment, a place of belonging, then you can intentionally create that community there that people can attach to, care for people, care for those attachment systems so that they know how to have healthy relationships with other people that involve the hellos and the goodbyes. That's really the point of transitions care, is really taking care of, because change is just an event, right? But transitions is slow. It's a process. So when we're going into a new place, it's a transition. It's going to take a while until things feel normal. So we have to be able to support people in the midst of that. And there's so many questions that come up when you're in transition about, is this normal? Does anybody see what I'm going through? Does it matter? Like, do I matter? Because we think about attachment needs. Oftentimes we talk about it with infants, right? Like how close they are to the caregiver. Does the caregiver meet my needs? And we talk a little like insecure attachments, right? The kid has to cry louder to get the parents' attention. And in international schools, some people can do that, but international schools that don't care about what's going on with the child or the parent or the teacher, it's all that avoidant attachment is basically like that. No one's listening to me when I have a need. So I got to meet my own needs. My needs don't matter. That does not create humans that know how to connect or that can meet the needs of others or that can be curious or empathetic. But that's a lot of times what happens in international schools is we ignore the need. And so then we don't know how to connect. We want to be able to be people in communities that can connect. We need to intentionally then create places that people can attach to and leave from healthy.
You make me think of a continuum of belonging, a continuum of being a connected community and what resources are in place to support the very healthy aspects of being so connected. At the left side of the continuum could be the international schools that have limited attachments, and then as we move all the way to the right, where we have school communities with a strong sense of belonging and feelings of connection and real validation of people's experiences, it's almost like an actualization of that community. And the work of SPAN in schools brings about that change to move the community further to the right of the continuum. So does my thinking make sense?
Yeah. When you were talking, it was making me think about students. Like if you ask a student the question of like, do you feel like you fit in here or do you feel belonging? You'll hear really quickly the truth about the reality of your community. That either I feel like I don't belong, this is not a place where anybody cares about me, I have to behave a certain way to fit in, or a real sense of like just who I am matters to the people here, I belong. And I think that that's what we want, is to create communities where people are accepted, belonging for who they are. Because international community, you have so many languages, cultures, meanings, values happening all in the same place. And so to be able to come together, to be curious, to be empathetic, to connect, like that takes real intentional work. So I think it does. And for the person in the transition, it is like a process. You can't just find belonging on day one, but you can do things intentionally to open that up so that they know that they can find belonging here. This is a place that wants me.
And that is one of my favorite quotes. I said it in the last episode and I'm repeating it again, and you just shared it, Amy, as well, by Brene Brown. So I'll repeat it. Belonging is about being accepted for who you are, while fitting in is about changing yourself to be accepted. And imagine starting a welcome meeting with all the new people with that quote, and then saying, we are a community that wants you to belong. We will make mistakes, because every community does. That is part of being human, right? We are a community that can have hard conversations. So when we make a mistake, when things don't go right, we can also have a conversation about that. When you set the tone right from the get-go as you're welcoming people into a community, you're not pretending like everything's perfect. And you're also setting the expectation for the kids who are there when you give that welcome speech and the ambassadors are all sitting there listening and they hear you say that. They know it's important if you're starting with that, right? So then it becomes part of their story too. Suddenly they're starting to use the words belonging is important, not just fitting in.
I think another piece that it makes me think about is just the research, John Hattie's research, all about academic success. And way down at the bottom in the negative, what is harmful to students' academic success is mobility. It inhibits learning. You walk into the school as a new student and you're fully in your fight, flight, freeze mode. You just want to know where the bathroom is and who you're going to eat lunch with and how are you going to survive. You're not ready to learn. And so we have to make people feel safe so that they can learn, to be able to be relaxed and to use their thinking brain again. We have to intentionally create programs that welcome, that let people know like it's okay. And you think about all the really practical things, signage that is really clear to kids who are speaking different languages, and parents like, where do I go? And all the communication that has to happen so that a new person can feel like, oh, okay, I know where the bathroom is at least, or like, I know how to get the teacher's attention, or I know who I'm supposed to talk to, or there's a kid who will talk to me, like all those things that can lower the stress so that the kid can learn. Because otherwise there's so much time that a teacher is spending trying to teach a kid. They're not listening. They're not hearing anything. They can't, because they just can't, they don't feel safe enough to be able to learn.
I want to share a very personal story related to that. I was in third grade at the International Community School of Abidjan, so in Côte d'Ivoire. And we had just moved buildings because it was the first day of third grade. So it was the same school. I hadn't moved schools, but I was new to that building and new to third grade. I was so nervous. I didn't know where the bathrooms were, and I peed myself. I was in third grade. I'm sitting in my chair, and I was so scared to ask where were the bathrooms. And it was traumatic. I still remember it today. I will never forget. I was too scared to ask where was the bathroom. I didn't want to interrupt the teacher. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do, and I just froze. And then I peed myself. And I don't remember it beyond that, how if it was extremely traumatizing. I guess my mom came to school, brought me the pants, so don't worry, I survived that situation in my life too. But I do think those are situations where now, and I would tell that story to the student ambassadors when we're practicing giving tours, I'm like, always point out where the nearest bathroom is to the specific classrooms, because it was so traumatizing to me that I didn't know where the bathroom was. And I didn't want to ask. I don't know why. It just wasn't, I don't remember, but it was traumatizing. So I think those are little things that we can do to positively impact And when you're a stayer, you forget those small details. You forget how important it is to find the bathroom.
One of the big trends in international education is wellness and social emotional learning and positive psychology. What the two of you are talking about with the Student Ambassador Program and understanding transitions is all about wellness, social emotional learning, student leadership. And as you're pointing out, students are not ready to learn until, like you're saying, they feel safe. They feel like they belong. I can see folks out there kind of thinking about the possibility of having SPAN and student ambassadors at their schools, maybe thinking, oh, it's going to be another initiative. Well, this is one that's going to come right in and complement, folks, what you're probably already doing now in your international schools. So the Student Ambassador Program, which I love it when educators come up with very practical, scaffolded ways to help students feel empowered, to help them be leaders, and connecting to their character strengths, and help them exercise their character strengths in real life experiences. So I think this is just super powerful. So Lina, tell us more about the vision for the Student Ambassador Program.
So, from my perspective, it's an opportunity for a leadership program meets peer support program meets community service all in one. And depending on what you want to focus on, whether it's the advisor and their strength or what you already have at your school and you don't want to step on other leadership programs' toes, which, by the way, in and of itself is also can be an issue. But kids learn such helpful, meaningful skills for life whilst being kind and caring. And I think that is just, when you think of a leadership program, you might imagine kids trying to get to the top. Like, I need this for college, I needed it. And it's like, hang on a second. It's also important about being kind and caring, right? That's like the number one thing about being a student ambassador. Becoming a stronger leader than you were last year. So it's about self-improvement as well as group. Like, you want the program to improve, but you also, as yourself, you get to see your leadership grow and change. And you're seeing the impact on your community, even in the smallest ways that you can imagine possible, where you're giving kids the opportunity to take on little projects where they can choose what part of the community they want to impact. For example, we had a kid who said, you know what, we need a parent ambassador program. So our school created a parent ambassador program because the kids said they needed one. And the kids started creating the one. And now at the school, there's a parent ambassador program. It didn't exist until the kids started creating it because they were given the space to do that. So my vision for student ambassadors is beyond just welcoming and saying goodbye. It's really what Brene Brown talks about, bringing to life those words of belonging and not just fitting in.
I know Lina could talk about this a lot. But I think the essential piece of a student ambassador is that whole thing of just lowering the barrier when that new student is coming in. They have a peer, somebody who can answer questions. They don't have to have the fear as much of addressing an adult. And oftentimes the better thing is, can the student ambassador contact the student even before they get there? Because then it's a familiar face already. You get to the new place and already there's someone that I recognize, that I know. And so that allows the new student to just feel just that little bit more comfortable. So I think that that's really the core essence of a student ambassador is being that bridge between the new students coming from the place that they were at to the new community and helping them connect.
That's the second time that you've spoken about reaching out to new students coming in and potentially to new parents before they arrive at the school. And of course, staff members, they're included in needing a contact ahead of time as well. So my son Max started overseas teaching last year, and he did the onboarding and had someone connect with him from his department. And then when he arrived, he did go through orientation where he already knew someone on campus. A key point for Max and for all newcomers, as you point out, is that they have someone that they know upon arrival. So thanks for sharing how important it is to have that very human contact before one even steps foot on campus.
Well, let's dig in a little deeper and maybe you can describe a little bit how the program might look different from high school, middle school, and elementary division perspectives. Let's start with Lina.
So the older the kids, the more responsibility they can take on. In high school, and I've mainly worked with high school, a little bit of middle school, but in high school, I highly recommend making the program student-led. The student ambassador guide that our group created gives you the option to choose, do you want an advisor-led program or a student-led program? The difference is obviously the amount of time you spend. And unfortunately, the student-led program actually takes up way more time as an adult. You think you're just kind of giving all of them the responsibility, but there's a lot you have to do behind the scenes. So you don't actually stand up on stage and give the speech. You help the kids write the speech. You go through it with them. You practice with them. Then they go on stage and do it, and your face has never been seen. So it's maybe not as rewarding in that you don't get to be on stage, but it is more rewarding because you can see these kids really impacting and growing and taking on things. It's just fascinating. In middle school, you would have a little more adult guidance, although you can have a lot of peer mentoring coming from the high school ambassadors, trickling down to the middle school, and then together middle school and high school ambassadors trickling down to the elementary school level. So there's a lot of peer mentoring that can happen and supporting and training as well. That builds their responsibilities with time.
So, Amy, maybe you can talk about some of the younger levels.
Yeah, so when we made the guide, I really wanted to make sure, because oftentimes student ambassador programs are most active and you find them in secondaries. So I really wanted to find somebody who did it regularly with elementary school students. And so we have a team member that contributed that does. And I was trying to hear more, what does it look like and how would it be different and how would it work out differently if it's student or advisor led? So one of the things that's really different about elementary is thinking about the classroom. Like oftentimes there's a real need for then the person who's in charge of the student ambassador program to be connected with the classroom teacher to give them the information that they need. And then the classroom teacher is really kind of facilitating like an advisor in their own classroom, figuring out how to help their class know what it means to welcome someone. The classroom teacher can get in touch with the parent ahead of time, find out little bits of information about their child that they want to share with the classroom so the kids that are in the class can already hear a little bit about the new kid that's coming.
Cool.
They can hear about the things that they like and where they're from, languages they speak, so that they already have something to connect to. They can be excited. The kids who are there, who are staying, can be excited about the new kid coming. And the new kid also then the teacher can kind of think about which kid might be best to help this new kid coming, whether there's activities that they like that are the same or languages they share so the child can be able to have a bridge there, feel more comfortable, so that way the classroom teacher can be much more involved. There's also a lot of involvement between the school counselors and the admissions department, making sure that all that communication happens really smoothly and timely, so that way that the teacher and the advisor, that the student ambassador, all those things happen not all of a sudden at the end, or like when there's bumpy communication, someone shows up and nobody knew that they were going to be there. You got to make sure that communication happens really smoothly. So I think otherwise there's ways for the program to too easily depend on just the school counselor. They're the only one that knows that these things are happening. So I think it's really important in an elementary school division, when you have those classrooms, for the classroom teacher to be really involved, as well as in the middle school. You can have your school counselor. A lot of times other people talked about doing things during extracurricular club times, where that's when the kids would come, or during lunches. Oftentimes the school counselors were talking about the kids being just excited for an opportunity to be a leader, excited to welcome a new kid. They really wanted to be a part of it. In some cases, they give the kids T-shirts. They get to be clearly the one welcoming the new students. In other cases, they have them serve during school events to guide people around the school, to tell people where to go, or during open days or official visits to the school, things like that. Like in cases, I know Lina's talked a little bit about like the important embassy ambassador people or whoever might be coming to your school, that the student ambassadors get to represent for the school, or during accreditation visits. So there's a lot of ways that different levels can be involved, and whether or not how much is put on a classroom teacher, a school counselor, an advisor, versus like with the students. But I think it's a great opportunity for mentoring and then helping the students relate to older and younger students.
I'm also hearing the importance of the admissions office in supporting new student transitions. That's come up a couple times, and I'm thinking about schools when the admissions secretaries or division secretary help lead new students through the school. In such a case, it makes so much sense that they receive training to be sort of ambassadors themselves. And if the school does not have a student ambassador program, it's really important they get that training.
I mean, my thought is really back to the thing we talked about, positive transitions care, making sure your whole community is constantly talking about that arrive or stay or leaver. Because if your staff that is in that role, oftentimes in the office where they're the ones who are receiving people right away when they walk in the door, if they can think about their own experience of feeling new and think about what that was like, and if you talk to them about that, then they can really bring that perspective to the new child that's walking in, the new parent that's walking in. I try to make sure that with staff to do the same sorts of things, that care is happening there too, that we're addressing their needs when they're new and talking about it. Because I think it cannot start by just telling them about the other person's experience. When you're going through this, you have to know what it feels like for your own experience of being new or staying or leaving, to relate to the new person, to really have empathy, to really, for that to be part of your perspective when you're welcoming the new students. Because I mean, Lena's never going to forget to tell somebody to talk about the bathroom. And I'm never, for me, I'm always going to make sure to talk to people about their housing or how to get somewhere, who to talk to, or who's the best person to ask a question to, because you need those things. So I think it's really starts with making sure all your staff are fully educated on what transitions is all about. What are the needs and what's normal in it? What are normal behaviors? Because a lot of times parents come in, they can be really anxious or defensive. And so it's we have to know that makes a lot of sense. They're completely new. We have to come to them with empathy. So just know that doesn't mean that there's some sort of stressful parent. They're stressed. So just come to them with empathy. Remember that what that feels like. And then I think that's a big piece.
Lina?
So the one story I want to tell, just to feel the difference there, was at a school where the admissions I always felt like they were pushing back, oh, that's Lina's thing, I'm trying to push this trend, which was a little odd to me because their job as admissions is to help people transition in. But apparently there was something about me trying to, and then what happened was, one of the co-advisors with the program became an admissions officer and was in there, and suddenly the admissions office became such a huge supporter of the program. It was fascinating to see, and they took on the parent ambassador program, and it was really cool to see how that happened. That clearly the way I was doing it was not the right way, because it was something to push up against. But when the person who was in there or working in there came in with this, that changed everything. So it's super interesting to see how it then blossomed. There were no more as many obstacles as there had been before. Before that, I was fighting for the new student list, who's actually coming tomorrow for orientation. I didn't even have that. I'm how are we having this conversation? I don't understand. And then years later, we're already contacting the new kids months in advance. That makes such a difference. Such a difference.
I'm just curious if you have a suggestion for somebody who is like you on the outside and doesn't have that fortunate opportunity of someone going from the transitions program into the admissions office, what they might do to kind of bridge that gap. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, the student ambassador guide that Amy and I and the others wrote together, we actually created, which I would be so grateful for now if I was doing this again, sample letters or sample communiques, so to speak, for the different stakeholders to start those conversations in writing, and then going there and then like Amy said, talking about transitions. If I were to share my personal story in third grade, and then, what was your struggle? And, actually making it a personal conversation, and then talking about why it's important, rather than coming in with, here's the problem, and I'm asking you to help solve this problem, because that's not necessarily their perspective.
One big piece that's I'll just give you guys, that's in the guide inside those letters, it's all about building foundational support, is about making sure that your language fits inside all the school language. So like the language of your program fits inside the things that the school already is committed to. So it's a lot harder to say no to something that you already said,
Very
yeah, that's what we
clever.
believe. So I think, it's really important to make sure that you're aligned with that. And then the other piece, honestly, is like, I talk about this a lot with the team that I was working with, is remembering the voices of the minority should not come over what the needs of the majority. So if the needs of the majority are saying like, what we need this, like this is really important, then you keep doing it. You keep, bringing people in, you make small changes, you start to educate a little bit at a time. You bring the next person in, you help them understand their own experience. And then you bring them in to understand, this is why this matters. And so I think it's a little bit at a time as you're doing that. But I think a really easy piece is just put it in the right language, like put it in your school language.
Brilliant. So at this stage, I think it's probably a good idea if we give the audience a sense of what are some of the parts of this guide. So maybe, Amy, you could start out telling us some of those.
Yeah. So we start with all the research, what it's grounded in, standards, and all those sorts of things. But then the pieces where we really have resources, like an abundance of resources for people to use, starts with building foundational support. How do you get the right people on? Going into what are student ambassadors, the mission, vision, and goals for the program. What are advisors? What do they do? What do they not do? Training, there's so many different things that you can train student ambassadors on. So what is that? As well as the training that they offer. Promoting positive transitions cares that we've been talking about a lot. What does that look like? And we have all sorts of examples inside of the guide of ways to do that, and free stuff that people have just offered for other people to use. Sustainability, how do you make that happen, especially with all the challenges that are in an international school year? Rolling enrollment, when people are coming in mid-year throughout different times in the year. Budget, even. There's like an example budget in there that you can take and use. The calendar of care, what does it look like in a year? How do you continuously improve your program? What kind of feedback do you need to get? What about the application process? Like we even have example application questions and applications, like parent signature. How do you get teacher approval, referral? What's specifically different about an elementary student ambassador program? And then we have a little piece in there just with testimonials. But all of these things also have resources inside them that you can either look at the example, or we've even made Google Docs that are a forced copy that you can open up and use for yourself. So there's all sorts of resources inside that should address a lot of the different pieces that happen within a student ambassador program.
So basically, you've covered it all, and I could go from zero to hero as a teacher coming into a school who's keen to start this kind of program. That's just fantastic. It sounds like
yes, and we also just, if you're beginning and that sounds overwhelming, we made a version that's like, here's where you have to begin, and then
quick
here's
start guide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things. When Amy and I were working on this, we spent a long time trying to figure out how to like visualize someone who's starting at the beginning, like the basics, the foundational support, like how does that look like versus, and then Amy created this like puzzle piece, like you plug in or you choose your own adventure, basically the puzzle pieces that are missing in your program that you'd like to enhance. So that's taking you down the adventure of enhancing your program. And one of the questions that will quite quickly come up is, okay, but what about the kids that arrive, or the teacher that arrives like mid-year and not at the time that we're running orientation, for example? And I think, again, that's where you look at what the foundational aspect provides. This is how you want to set it up, and here's some suggestions, and you decide as a school or how you want it to look like. Talking with admissions, what does that look like? For example, one aspect that we struggled with at my last school was always like, if the kids don't show up to orientation, are they allowed to start school on the first day of school? And I was very adamant of saying no. It is so stressful for the new kid, and is so stressful for student ambassadors because they want to make everything perfect for the new kid. And so the stress that the ambassadors are going through in trying to do things right for the new kid coming in, who didn't show up to orientation, have the full few days of orientation and missed that piece, we're going to give them a few days. So they're going to have to start 3 days later. It's not ideal in terms of their learning, but they're not going to learn much anyway in those first 3 days if it's so stressful. We came to that agreement after quite some time. It wasn't something that was easy to come to an agreement with. And it's something that you need to kind of like weigh in, like what are the pros and cons of having a kid who didn't come to orientation start right on the first day like everyone else versus giving them a few days and giving them the proper welcome that they deserve. And we started calling it mini orientation at the last school I was at. I can't remember what word we used in the guide. Amy, maybe you can, what did we call it?
Rolling enrollment.
Rolling enrollment, that's the
I think
word.
we said mid-year.
Mid-year, right. So when you have a kid coming in a little bit later, you still have a process specific to them. It might not be at the same level as the one that starts each semester, let's say, but they deserve that. And you need to set that up in a separate way. And you have the basic documents that you would have for all of the kids. You want it for that one kid starting a little bit later or coming in later to have that as well. And what that looks like, you can then decide as the advisor, working together with your admissions team, working with your administration, and coming to agreements on what is the right timing.
All right. So our audience is, of course, asking, how can they get their hands on the Student Ambassador Program Guide? So please answer this question for all of us.
Yes, please.
I'd be happy to. If you go to spanschools.org and you go into the member resources, you'll find individual member resources. You become a member and you get access to not just the Student Ambassador Program Guide, but also Doug Oda's Safe Passage book study, as well as there's like a talk from Valerie Besenseny and Jane Barron all about positive transitions care, all the past seasons of The Nest, symposiums, so like all the conferences that we have put on with all the speakers, Ruth and Crystal Shaughnessy and a whole bunch of people, and Doug himself. So all those resources you'll get if you go to SPAN and become an individual member. It's not expensive for how much is available to you there. So if you go there, you'll be able to access the guide. All that will be yours.
Nice.
I can tell a really quick anecdote. I was really excited after a talk that we gave. One of the people who comes to the Nest regularly, she had the whole Student Ambassador Program Guide printed out, which the only reason I thought about printing is because Lina said, as soon as people get this, they're going to print it. And I'm like, okay. So I spent all this time putting page numbers on the pages to make sure that people wouldn't be confused about what was the order. So it was exciting to see people using it and the impact that it's been having just initially at the different schools around the world.
That's fantastic. So validating. And then also your belief in this work is your motivator. And so knowing that you are having this impact is just got to be such a wonderful thing.
Can I just share a story that popped into my mind? Actually, I wasn't such a believer in this. Being a third culture kid myself, having moved around a lot, the first few schools I worked at didn't have an ambassador program, didn't have any transitions program, nothing. And so it wasn't actually until kids started taking it on as it became a student-led experience. And I saw that's when I was convinced this is amazing. It just isn't the same when it's top down coming from an advisor, which isn't an option that you can do if you don't have as much time or it's just the way you feel comfortable. Absolutely. If you're willing to take a small risk and to see how amazing a program can grow and what can become of it that you yourself as an adult can never imagine, because the kids are the ones that see it with their peers. They will make something amazing happen at your school. When you give them the space, you give them that respect, you set boundaries, of course, so that everyone feels safe, and you're always the one upholding them, and that's what can be your main job. But it is amazing. And ever since I've seen that happen, I am such a true believer in the Student Ambassador Program and would recommend any school, regardless of how many transitions that happen, to have something in place because it is so powerful.
It's fantastic. I agree with you because I think, students tend to think of teachers as having it all together and not necessarily needing, so they can't really quite relate when the teacher or the counselor is saying, this is important. But when they hear it from their peers, they're going to buy in. It's wonderful. So as we wrap up here, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you see as the future of SPAN, as the larger sort of parent initiative, and then the student ambassador programs in international schools. Let's ask Amy.
So, I mean, the greatest focus of SPAN is just connecting positive transitions care workers to each other and to best practices. So that is what we want to continue to grow, is talking about what is current research, doing the research, or connecting people so that the actual practitioner who's working with the students and the parents and the staff can have all the knowledge and the resources that they need to be able to go and do it well. And for us then to know, like, what is the standard? What does it mean for transitions care to be good? And I think that's where SPAN wants to go, is to keep growing in that and to keep connecting people. And I'd love to see the student ambassador program, like resources, ways that we can help people that for those to grow. I mean, we barely scrape the surface of the stuff that we cover in the guide. And Lina and I can talk for a long time. So it's like wanting to have all the different people who contributed speak to each piece of the guide. And so that people can really learn, what does that mean? What does that look like fleshed out? Because it can be so different in each context. So we really want to see, how can we grow this to meet people's needs where they're at.
And I would just like to add, if you're not wanting to be a member of SPAN, you don't want to pay and want to have that student ambassador guide in your hands or digitally on your computer, then go back to that quote that I shared from Brene Brown, belonging versus fitting in. And if you start there and you think about, how am I going to help all these different human beings transitioning in different things, whether it's going from one division to the next division, grade level, it's, relationships ending, it's countries moving, it's parents divorcing, all this kind of stuff. Go back to belonging versus fitting in. The answer is from that person and not from the viewer. Because the fitting in is from the viewing perspective. Is that person fitting in from my perspective? But the belonging description comes from the person themselves and their experience. So if you want to know if your community members feel belonging, then you need to have real conversations with them of what that looks like, that belonging, and then start from there.
Thank you for that. It really brings it all back to the individual and their understanding and perspective. All right, so you've shared so much terrific information, and let's help our listeners connect with you to learn more about SPAN and the Student Ambassador Program. Lina, let's start with you. How can people follow you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram under Josie the Therapy Dog with a period in between, josie.the.therapy.dog. You can find me on the International School Counseling Association Task Force page, so ISCA. You can find me there. And you can find me on the Linden Global Services for Students as an online counselor there. You can find my bio there, and you can connect with me through there or refer me to people that you think would benefit from meeting with me.
Thank you. Amy?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me on the spanschools.org website, as well as my blog, findingmyvoice.amy.shelflin.com. Last episode, I talked about a book, My Life Without Nico. My big passion is resources that help parents. So on there, I wrote a whole thing with questions and activities for parents, specifically for that book, as well as a bunch of others. And it's all free. So I really very much, like we talked about, believe that we would all, no matter whether we're in international school or any life change, we would all benefit from knowing better how to manage transitions and how to deal with hellos and goodbyes. So I just believe in it. And I think the more that we reach people with a message, the better.
And just to remind the listeners, go to the show notes for that contact information as well as the resources that we've mentioned.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm sort of picturing a raft of resources that you're offering, Amy. And so that ties back in with the raft process.
I have the rafting journal on there on my blog. You can get it.
Excellent. Ladies, this has been wonderful, joyful, beautiful. Thank you for spending the time. Thank you for giving of yourselves, sharing your personal stories, and thank you for all you do for everybody in an international school community, the students, the parents, the teachers, and the support staff. And it's just so wonderful to get to know you a little bit and hear about your programs and your aspirations for the future. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us. This is like Amy and I, a fluke connection online. We've never actually met in person. Let's just say it as it is. If we get to go to the ISCA conference, if she gets to be there, that will be our first time hugging it out.
Yes, there's going to be a long time there.
It'll be really much time together. All online though.
So thank you, David and Audrey. This has been really awesome.
Yes, thank you both so much. It's a great opportunity to be able to talk more about it, share with more people, and just to talk about this with like-minded people who care about this stuff too.
This conversation has been truly super wonderful, ladies. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.